It's Henry, right? I'm Delilah. So, what's wrong with you?
Delilah is never seen. She has no character model and no photograph tucked away in a menu. No face for the player to recognize or forget. She exists without proof. That contradiction of intimacy without form is the quiet tension at the heart of Firewatch. It's what makes Delilah compelling and what makes her linger. Delilah exists entirely as a voice. Charming, sharp, playful, defensive, lonely. Sometimes all at once.
I promise I'll be here for you in this difficult time.
She drifts through the static, arriving through a handheld radio like a thought you didn't realize you were waiting for. She feels close, precisely because she never quite is, and in that distance, the game invites us to do something dangerous. To fill in the gaps, to imagine, and to project. To mistake familiarity for understanding. Because Firewatch understands the power of absence. It understands that what we imagine often carries more emotional weight than anything a game can show us directly. Delilah lives in that space between signal and silence. She's defined less by who she is, and more by how we listen to her, and by what we want her voice to mean, echoing back at us from the trees. We never see Delilah. Our mental image of her is shaped by tone, timing, pauses, jokes, evasions. The radio becomes a mirror. When she flirts, we decide whether it means something. When she deflects, we decide whether to press. And when she goes quiet, we're invited to decide what the silence contains. This is where Firewatch does something quietly radical. It allows emotional momentum to build without ever promising emotional payoff. Most games are careful about this. They either formalize relationships through mechanics, or they undercut intimacy with distance. Firewatch does neither. Instead, it lets the player sit inside a growing sense of closeness that has no clear destination. Delilah never becomes a quest marker or a reward. She remains contingent, responsive to how you speak to her, but never really available. The radio itself is key here. It's intimate without being vulnerable. You can speak freely, but you're never exposed, and you can ignore it if you choose, in a way that you otherwise couldn't. And you are always alone when you talk to Delilah, just as she's always alone when she replies. The connection feels private, like some kind of direct link between your souls, but it is also carefully controlled. There's always a button to press, and always a transmission to end. Delilah encourages closeness, but she also manages distance. She asks personal questions, but rarely answers them fully. She jokes to soften moments that might otherwise demand sincerity. She steers conversations away from places that might require follow-through. The result is a relationship that feels alive precisely because it's incomplete. She's not written as a romantic reward or a narrative endpoint. She's written as a person who is actively avoiding becoming one. There is something inherently safe about a voice. A voice can comfort without committing because the distance and the safety in that distance is always implied. It can be present without being accountable, and some semblance of intimacy becomes possible without risking the mess of real proximity. Firewatch understands this. Delilah is this. The game takes place in a space defined by distance, vast forests, empty towers, long sightlines. And yet the most significant relationship in the story is carried entirely through a thin wire and a handheld radio. That contrast matters. Delilah feels close because everything else, everything in our lives, is far away. But voices are also easy to idolize. Without a face, without body language, without the small frictions of real presence, Delilah becomes elastic. She can be charming without being intrusive, funny without being cruel, and caring without being responsible for that care. The player fills in the gaps generously, sometimes more generously than the text itself supports. But the game never lies to the player about Delilah. It simply withholds the grounding details that would collapse the fantasy, and the player, often unconsciously, does the rest of the work. Because Delilah and Henry are snapshots of moments in the same emotional trajectory. Henry runs to the wilderness and to solitude. He is in flight, but still raw. His grief is still close to the surface, even when he refuses to look at it directly. The tower is temporary, summer, an interlude. Delilah, by contrast, has already arrived. She has made the lookout tower her life, not as a pause, but as a pattern. Her stories are full of half-truths, omissions, and humor used as armor. She is skilled at making things sound lighter than they are. When conversations drift towards a real consequence, she reframes, redirects, or jokes her way out. It's not cruelty, which is what we feel initially. It's just fear. Because Delilah's defining trait is not manipulation or dishonesty. It's inertia. She knows what it would mean to leave, to be seen, to re-enter the world she stepped out of, and she can't quite do it. The tower is a buffer between her and the decisions she's been deferring for years. The radio allows her intimacy without consequence, and confession without any accountability. She can be emotionally present without having to act on anything she says. She can be kind without having to be brave. And in that sense, Delilah is the perfect voice for the wilderness, present, comforting, and ultimately unreachable. It's tempting to read Delilah as someone who leads Henry on, someone who invites intimacy only to withdraw it. And I think if the genders were reversed, we might write off Delilah as a Discord fuckboy. But that framing lets the player off too easily, I think. The truth is just more uncomfortable. The relationship only works because both sides agree not to push it. We're complicit in the fantasy. The player often wants Delilah to be bolder than she is, to take a risk, to turn implication into action. But that desire often masks something else. The hope that connection can happen without cost. But shared vulnerability with time and isolation will naturally become something real, without anyone having to choose it deliberately. Firewatch gently indulges this hope, and then refuses to validate it at the end. And Delilah doesn't promise anything she doesn't deliver. She is consistently herself. It's the player who fills in the emotional future, who imagines what might happen after the summer ends, who mistakes tone for intent and proximity for commitment. The disappointment we feel at the ending isn't narrative dissatisfaction. It's discomfort in recognizing a dynamic we've participated in. And there's a parallel here between Delilah and the game's broader mystery. For much of Firewatch, Henry, and by extension the player, constructs a story more elaborate than reality warrants. About surveillance, shadowy government conspiracies, and hidden observers, the forest becomes charged with meaning because meaning feels preferable to emptiness. Delilah participates in this, as always. She speculates, she indulges the tension. She doesn't shut this fantasy down until it becomes impossible to sustain. Faced with loneliness, isolation, and unresolved grief, both characters reach for narratives that make their situation feel significant. The mystery offers shape, the relationship offers warmth, but neither fully survives contact with reality when the bubble bursts. When the truth arrives, both times, it's smaller, sadder, and more mundane than expected. Not because the game is cynical, but because it's honest about the way things are. And that's how fantasies and the game end. Much of Delilah's power comes from what she doesn't do at the end of Firewatch. She doesn't wait. She does not dramatically appear. She just leaves. She just isn't there. And I think how the player reacts to that can say a lot. For some, it's a betrayal of a relationship forged over weeks of shared loneliness deep within the forest, but for others, it feels inevitable, entirely appropriate. You're never meeting your long-distance crush. You're never having that closure. The distance is the point. The distance is what you both wanted. Up until that point, Firewatch has been gently encouraging a fantasy. That shared vulnerability plus time plus isolation might equal connection. That two people avoiding their lives might somehow find resolution in each other. Delilah's absence in those final moments punctures that illusion. She chooses movement over confrontation and distance over explanation. She does what she always has done when things threaten to become real, and in doing so, she remains consistent. There's no final conversation that resolves everything, and no emotional summation to hang your hat on. Just static, smoke, and a sense of something unfinished. That lack of closure is deafening at the end. Delilah stays with players as the credits roll because she feels unfinished, not in the narrative sense, but in the way that real people often are. She doesn't learn a grand lesson. She doesn't dramatically change. She doesn't transform into a better or worse version of herself. There is no arc. She simply continues being herself with all the limits that implies. It's a story about failing to overcome. Because characters are often defined by growth. They arc, they resolve, they become. Delilah resists this structure. She exists in a holding pattern, and she invites the player to share it, albeit temporarily, while she wants it. And that's why she resonates. She embodies a specific, very human ache, the comfort of almost connection, the safety of voices in the dark. Delilah is not a love interest or a mystery. She's a reminder that intimacy isn't just about proximity. It's about presence, and presence requires showing up. Thank you for watching.